Dave Talks Comics, Episode 35. Dave Talks Comics is a podcast on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comics I have read and cartoons I have watched. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This podcast is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics and cartoons, I may spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about Who's Who and the OHotMU. That is, this will be my second installment of Who's OHotMU, wherein I comment on entries from Who's Who and the official handbook to the Marvel Universe. And I will be talking about Wolverine Blood Hungry, which first appeared in Marvel Comics Presents issues 85 to 92. Who's OHotMU, Part 2. Chapter 2? Chapter 2? I'm not sure. Okay, this is the segment in which I am reading through the original run of Who's Who and the original run of the official handbook to the Marvel Universe, of the Marvel Universe, of the Marvel Universe. And I'm just going through the stuff that I've read recently in the past week or so, and the pages that I've read, because I'm trying to read a page a day, but I'm not quite getting there. Some days I just forget about it. But anyhow, so I've read about 5 more pages from each, and I'm going to go through them. I'm going to start with Who's Who. I believe I finished last time with All-Star Squadron. The next page here is the All-Star Squadron headquarters. The All-Star Squadron was headquartered in the Trilon and Perisphere. The Trilon and Perisphere were buildings? I guess they were buildings, structures that were built for the 1939-1940 New York World's Fair. And these were things that actually did exist. You can go back and you can find photographs of them if you Google them. But I believe they were torn down, possibly for scrap metal, possibly for the war effort. I'm not sure, but I'm positive they were torn down. They no longer exist. I'm not even sure if the fairground exists as it once did, or if there's anything left from the fairground. So you get a cross-section of the Perisphere, which shows a lot more of it than I think was actually shown in the comic books. There was a big meeting room, which was shown in the comic books, but then there was living quarters and a gym and all sorts of stuff, labs, and I don't remember them ever showing all of these things in the comic book. The next page is actually related to All-Star Squadron. It's Amazing Man, who was a character that I talked about when I talked about, if you want to go back and listen to, when I talked about the Ultra Saga, which was All-Star Squadrons 21 through 26 plus annual number 2. His first appearance was in All-Star Squadron number 23. And let's see, is there anything else here? He was from Detroit originally. His real name was Will Everett. He had been an athlete. He had competed with Jesse Owens at the 1940. No, it was the 1936, I believe. Hold on, it should say here. The 1936 Berlin Olympics. Yes, and his powers came from experiments that the Ultra Humanite did on him. and it gave him the ability to change his body's composition into anything. So he could touch a brick wall, turn into brick, touch a metal pipe, and turn into metal, etc. And the picture here of him is drawn by Jerry Ordway. It's really nice. Next page is a Mazo. Mazo's a robot who fought the Justice League on numerous occasions. He was built by Professor Ivo and was able to take on the abilities of anybody he was near, and of course normally that was the Justice League. Now the picture here is drawn by Mike Zeck. I didn't remember that, but it's really gorgeous. Love to have some of that. I don't know if Mike Zeck ever drew. Now I'm curious to know if Mike Zeck ever drew them, or if this was the only time he drew a Mazo. But it's a beautiful page. And it was inked by John Beatty, and I believe that's the team that was doing Captain America about this time. I know Mike Zeck was. I think John Beatty was inking him. So his first appearance was in Brave and Bold number 30, so that was actually before the Justice League even got their own book, because I believe they first appeared in the Brave and the Bold. And he's got some interesting appearances in Justice League, although he doesn't look exactly the same in Justice League. But there is a cool story, I believe, in the second season of the Justice League series, before it became Justice League. I'm talking about the animated series, before it became Justice League Unlimited, or Unlimited? Yeah, I believe that's what it is. JLU stands for. Okay, next is Ambush Bug. Ambush Bug, let's see, his real identity is Erwin Schwab. First appeared in DC Comics Presents number 52, which I believe I've read. I think that was in a DC Blue Ribbon Digest that I bought back in the day. So I think I've read his first appearance. And he was drawn by Keith Giffen. And I think and this page is drawn by Keith Giffen. There was also a 4-issue miniseries that I read, and that was one of the earliest episodes of Dave Talks Comics. In fact, that was probably when it was still Dave Talks Comics and Cartoons that I talked about it. I wasn't crazy about the miniseries, but Ambush Bug is one of those weird characters. Let's see, what else? Okay, and then finally there is Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld, and this is one of these cases where this is a blind spot for me. I know of Amethyst. I remember when the comic books were coming out. This is drawn by Ernie Colon. It's beautiful artwork, but I don't. I've never read it. I think there is a collection of it. I think they finally released a collection of it, and this is one of these things I probably should go back and pick up, and given the right opportunity, I will. But Amethyst was basically a young girl. She was, from reading this, she was born in another dimension, and her parents were killed, and she was sent to Earth as a very young child, or to our dimension as a very young child. And then when she's about 13, something happens. She gets sent back to her own world, and where time is different, and so instead of being 13, she's 20 or something like that. Something like that, yes. And so, and there's, so it's kind of a sword and sorcery type of story, I believe, from what I've read. But I think I'd probably enjoy it. I just have never given it a chance, and it was the sort of thing that I kind of wasn't ready to give a chance when I was in my early teens, because this is from the early 80s. Although it says her first appearance was in Legion of Superheroes number 296, which makes me wonder if that was just a preview, one of those preview inserts in Legion of Superheroes 296, or if she was actually part of a Legion story. And I'm not sure, and the description here doesn't say, which leads me to think it probably was a preview in Legion of Superheroes 296. Angleman is the next entry. Angleman's base of operations is Washington, D.C. His real name is Angelo Bend. His occupation is professional criminal. He's a Wonder Woman villain. He first appeared in Wonder Woman number 70, and that would place him in the Golden Age. I believe it came out in November 54 is the cover date of that issue. And basically he has a weapon the awesome angler, a triangular device which opens spatial portals, allowing the devious deceptor to warp his way through time. I haven't gone as far as to look up all his appearances to see how frequent a villain how many appearances he has, but I assume it must be more than just a few if they're choosing to include him here. And he shares a page with Animal Man. And Animal Man's real name is Buddy Baker. Animal Man is a character I think has had considerably more appearances, although maybe not at this point, than Angle Man. His professional, in his day job, he was a stuntman. He first appeared, I believe, in the Silver Age, Strange Adventures number 180. And he was also a member of the Forgotten Heroes, which was a team that, if I remember correctly, I think I looked this up, they really didn't have that many appearances. It was kind of him and like Cave Carson and the Sea Devils and Dolphin and maybe a couple other of these heroes who didn't quite fit the, cape and tights mold of superhero. And although it hadn't come out at this time, Animal Man's probably best known story is one that was written by Grant Morrison in, I'm not sure if it was the late 80s or the early 90s. I think it was one of those two, but it's one that's kind of on my list of things that I need to at least give a try to. And let's see, his powers, he can absorb, while near any animal, Buddy Baker somehow absorbs its special abilities. He can fly like a bird, swim like a fish, race as fast as a jaguar, hop like a kangaroo. And this picture here is drawn by Gil Kane. A really nice picture, especially you get a shot of Animal Man in costume running straight ahead, and then there's like little pictures in the background in blue of him both in and out of costume. Okay, moving over to Marvel, the OHotMU. The next character is Angar the Screamer. And this is one I know nothing about. According to this, his first appearance was in was in Daredevil number 100. And he was some sort of a singer who gained the ability to scream really loudly. And I can see how that would cause problems for Daredevil. He looks very 70s in his look. Cliched 70s. Okay, moving on. The next character is Angel of the X-Men, a.k.a. Warren Kenneth Worthington III. Okay, I didn't know what his middle name was. And his first appearance was, of course, in X-Men number 1 from 1963, I think? I'm not sure. But interesting to note that he is 6 feet tall, but he only weighs 150 pounds. His bones are hollow like a bird's bones are, which makes it easier for him to fly. And let's see, was there anything interesting about his powers that they mentioned? Well, of course, they go into all sorts of detail with how far these people can do this or that, and it says he can fly at 150 miles per hour without the help of a tailwind for up to half an hour before tiring to an appreciable degree. And they talk a little bit more about how far he can fly. They say that he cannot fly. He cannot make a transatlantic flight solely under his own power. Okay, moving on. The next page is Annihilus. And I'm guessing, or maybe it's Annihilus. I'm not sure on the pronunciation. His real name is Annihilus, and his occupation is megalomaniac. And he is from the negative zone. And according to his origin, he was like a mutated insect, something like that. He was It says here, one of the Tyanan ships crashed upon a barren volcanic world, and the dying voyagers set free all of their life spores in their final act. One of the spores was an insectoid being who possessed great mutated intelligence. And so that's what became Annihilus. And he kind of has, well, he has green eyes and, well, they say green skin, although I don't know, maybe this is an exoskeleton or body, but he's got these big wings, and he's a Fantastic Four villain. He first appeared in Fantastic Four Annual number 6. I may have read a story with him in one of those Fantastic Four collections. I'm not sure, but I'm not real familiar with him. I've heard of him, but the next character is Ant-Man, and this is really Ant-Man 2. This is not Henry Pym. This is Scott Lang, who was also the father of the hero who would be known as Stature, I believe, from the Young Avengers, Cassie Lang. And his first appearance was in Marvel Premiere number 47. I haven't read that. I have read a couple of his early appearances in Iron Man. He kind of was appearing in Iron Man. This was back in like the mid-100s, I think. Because I think he showed up in the... Oh, I know where it was. It was Iron Man 130 or 129, which I picked up at Super Show a couple years ago. Or earlier this year, I think, actually. No, not this year. Last year, 2013. And he had a number of appearances in there alongside Iron Man and also in his own adventures. Although I don't think it was a backup feature. He was part of the Iron Man story. Because I think he worked for Stark at one point. But he got his hands on the technology that what's his name? That Pym had used. And I think his outfit looks a little different from Pym's, but I'm not really well versed in. And they don't have a picture of Pym here. They just have a picture of him. Let's see. Are any of these characters drawn by anybody? Brian Postman has drawn 3 of these so far. Yeah, nothing phenomenal in my book so far. And the final character here that I'm going to talk about is Aquarian, whose real name is Wundan. His occupation is prophet. Okay. He's an alien. And he's the herald of the new age. And I guess this... Let's see, his first appearance was in Fear number 17. So this was about the time of the whole Age of Aquarius thing in the 70s, and which I think I was alive for, but I wasn't. I was very young at that point. So I'd seen things, and oh yeah, and then they both in this one and in the Ant-Man page, they go into some really scientific jargon here, talking about stuff which I really couldn't make heads or tails of, and really made me wonder, if the person writing this was just, whether they had gotten something from somebody else, or whether, or how they came up with this stuff. So, for instance, on the Ant-Man page, it says the mechanics involve having most of the mass of the nucleus of each affected atom convert into energetic particles which take up orbit around the nucleus. Thus, although gravitons, the elementary particles of gravity, do not affect these particles, the mass of the original volume remains intact. This means a punch delivered by the half-inch Ant-Man feels like the blow of a normal-sized man. Okay, yeah, I understand that last sentence, but the previous one, whoa. And then in the Aquarians entry, under his powers, let's see, let me see if I can find this. It talks about this field of... Okay, so the cosmic cube amplified Wundar's energetic, absorbing powers to the nth degree. Now a field of entropic null force surrounds his body at all times, in a field which at equilibrium radiates to a distance of 5 feet from any point on the surface of his body. With concentration, the Aquarian can contract the null field to about 5 inches in thickness, or expand it to a maximum distance of approximately 500 feet. He can never shut down the field completely. The null field neutralizes most of the electromagnetic spectrum. Well, it says light, but I think it should read sound, light, electricity, gravity, magnetism, and so on, as well as sound. Because sound and light do not penetrate the null field, the Aquarian is effectively blind and deaf. Oh yeah, here we go. This is where it really gets scientific. The Aquarian can also neutralize kinetic energy over 15 foot-pounds per second, 20.34 joules, or 1.3 times 10 to the power of 20 electron volts. His body's null field is of opposite polarity to that of fields of normal atomic matter. Hence, his field nullifies kinetic energy in direct ratio to the inertia, resistance of objects in motion to changes of motion of the moving object. Only objects with kinetic energy below 15 foot-pounds per second squared are permitted through the field without any cancellation of inertia, such as average arm moving a distance of 1 foot in 2 seconds. The net effect of any object entering his null field is that it loses its kinetic energy. Okay, this is just way too much. Way too much. Hopefully future descriptions of powers, I mean, that stuff just went in one ear and out the other. It just did nothing for me. So that's it for the second installment of Who's OHotMU. Wolverine, Blood Hungry. This is a story that first ran in Marvel Comics Presents numbers 85 to 92. That's 8 chapters. Each chapter was 8 pages long, so it's only 64 pages in all. But it was collected in a trade paperback roughly 22 years ago, something like that. The trade paperback is out of print, I believe, but you can find it on Amazon and other websites that sell this kind of stuff, and it's not too expensive. It's not in super high demand, and I don't know, it may have been reprinted in other collections, but there is a reprint just of this 64-page story. The story was written by Peter David and drawn by Sam Keith, and it's set in Madripoor. The main characters, other than Wolverine, are his girlfriend at the time, Tiger. The big villain in the book is Cyber, a character I wasn't really familiar with before reading this, and I don't think I've seen in anything else, and I haven't done the research to find out how much he's appeared over the years. And then there's a couple other named characters. There's General Coy, who is, I guess, a local big shot heavy man in important mobster type character. I don't know, in Madripoor. I'm not really that familiar with Madripoor. I've heard the name before, but I really don't know that much about it. And then there's also this wolf that Wolverine first encounters in the first chapter, and then there's a cat who travels with the wolf who shows up a couple chapters in. So, let's see. So the story is basically a conflict between Wolverine and Cyber, and Cyber is somebody who Wolverine has encountered before, and then you've got Wolverine's girlfriend, Tiger, and she holds some kind of influence in Madripoor, because at one point she's involved in some sort of a deal to buy drugs to keep them out of the hands of General Coy. And another interesting aspect of the story is that Cyber. Okay, so Cyber he's got this adamantium skin, or his skin is covered with adamantium, I think, which makes it very hard for Wolverine to harm him. Which is one thing that adds a twist to it, because quite often Wolverine is portrayed as this invulnerable and extremely fierce warrior who can take down just about anybody, which means you've got to up the ante so much to make, if it's just a fight, to make it interesting, because otherwise it seems like Wolverine should be able to beat anyone. So Cyber is very tough to kill, and in addition to that, he also has been using this hallucinogen. He's got claws, not as big as Wolverine's, much shorter, just a few inches in length, not like a foot or more. In fact, the way Sam Keith draws them quite often, they look like they're probably more like a foot and a half in length sometimes. And sometimes they're very curved, and yeah, I think quite often the way he draws them, they look very curved. I mean, certainly on some of these covers as I look at them. So, but Cyber has these short claws, which I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 inches in length, but he coats them with this hallucinogen, which adds an interesting twist to the story, because this strikes at Wolverine in a way, and I suppose some writers might say that Wolverine's body would absorb the hallucinogen and it wouldn't impact him, but in this story, it does impact him, and he has at least one experience where Cyber scrapes him, cuts him with his claws, and he goes into this hallucinogenic state, and there's this wonderful sequence which lasts over, I think, about 3 of the chapters, in which Wolverine thinks he's back in high school, and Cyber is the football coach, and Wolverine, and there's some argument between he and Cyber over a girl, and they've got these crazy cars, and there's this crazy game of chicken, which is like something out of, I guess, Rebel Without a Cause. But it's a really cool sequence. And once, years ago, on eBay, somebody was selling one of these pages, and I don't know what they want. They wanted something like $500 or $600 for it. I so wish I had gone for it and spent it. I mean, I think that's what it ended up going for, something like $550 or $600. It might have even been a double page spread. It might not have been a single page, but it was one of the pages from the hallucinogenic scene. And Cyber in the dream has this giant car which looks like a Wienermobile, and it's just crazy. But I didn't buy it. Let's see, what else? Okay, so Tiger is an interesting character. She is like a lot of the women that Sam Keith draws. She's very beautiful in the way that Sam Keith draws them, and she has some nice talky parts, I guess. There's a negotiation between her and Cyber. And then later on, there's a negotiation between her and General Coy. And throughout all of this, I really like the way that Sam Keith, what he does with the panels. I mean, you can tell a story using just a 6-panel grid, 2 across and 3 down. And you can do it very well and very effectively. But Sam Keith definitely does not believe in telling a story that way. There's lots of splash pages, but there's also lots of little panels, that help to tell the story, that help to move the story forward and give you an idea of how things, and just embellish, and just give more to the story than you would get from just 6 panels on a page. And this isn't just true in this story. This is true in other stories. I first read this story probably 10 years ago, maybe a little more. My introduction to Sam Keith was The Max, which I saw when it first came out back in the early 90s. And I read a couple issues then. And then when they reprinted The Max in its entirety, I guess about 10 years ago, I bought all of those. Some of those are out of print. Some of them are not, or some of them aren't that hard to find. But it's a 6-volume collection. That's a great story. But this is one that when I came back to comics sometime around 2002, 2003, maybe 2004, I can't remember exactly. This was a story that I picked up. I bought it off of eBay. And of course there was no comic book database back then. There was no comics.org back then, I don't think. So I was just buying it on the strength of what was in the eBay listing. But I knew that I liked Sam Keith, and I was interested in reading a Wolverine story. And it's a really great story. And I remember after I read that, I wrote to Peter David, and I didn't really have much to say. I just said, this is a really cool story, and I have you ever worked, is there any chance you'll ever work with Sam Keith again? And he was, he was like, thank you. He wrote back fairly quickly. He said, thank you, and it was great working with Sam Keith or something like that. I don't know if I still have the email or not. But, he said, Sam Keith was a great guy or a great artist, and but he doesn't know when or if. And I don't think he ever worked with him again. Another thing I should say about the story is the wolf and the cat do play an important part. The wolf shows up very early in the story, and Wolverine has an interaction with the wolf where Wolverine has killed a deer and is eating the deer meat raw, and the wolf comes up, or maybe the wolf, actually, let me take a look so I can make sure I get this straight. Let's see, they are both hunting. Yeah, Wolverine kills, but then he gives some of the meat to the wolf. And then later on, the wolf shows up with a cat. And this is, so that, and the wolf, and in the end, the wolf plays, well, in two instances, the wolf and the cat play an important part in the story, both in the final fight with Cyber and also in helping Tiger to locate Wolverine after he's having this hallucinogenic dreams, and it isn't just that he was scraped with the claws, maybe nails would be a better way to put it considering how short they are, of Cyber, but I mean he was really gutted, and of course Wolverine has that healing factor which allows him to recover much faster than a regular human would, but he still is in bad shape, and the wolf and the kitten lead her to him. Let's see, is there anything else to say about this story? I mean, obviously, I really like this story. This is one of my favorite things that I've read recently, and I loved it when I first read it, and I loved it now. It's 10 years later. The story's about 20 years old. It first appeared, I believe, in 1991. I believe all the issues are from 91, but I think Marvel Comics Presents at that time was either coming out twice a month, or maybe even weekly. I'm not certain. There is one more story. Sam Keith drew 2 stories for Marvel Comics Presents. He did a ton of covers, but he didn't always do the insides. But he did do the covers on these issues, and they're all beautiful covers, all in their own right. They're beautiful covers. But he continued to do covers for Marvel Comics Presents between this story and the next one, which was about 30 issues later or something like that. But he wasn't, I don't think he was doing very many interiors for, I think the only other interiors he did was for this other Wolverine story, which started somewhere around 117, 116, something like that. I think it also ran 8 parts, might have been 6. It's either 6 or 8 parts. And I have all of those, and I'm going to read those, but probably not right away. And I think that one was written by Howard Mackey, not Peter David. So that's it for Wolverine Blood Hungry. Overall, I think this is a really cool story, whether you're a Wolverine fan or not. Certainly if you're a Peter David fan or a Sam Keith fan. This is great Sam Keith artwork. And it's certainly not your typical superhero story, but it is in some ways your typical, face-off between a hero and a villain, which delves into the hero's past. And it really doesn't require that you have any prior knowledge. You really don't need to know that much before reading this. It isn't like strongly tied into, at least I didn't see it. Maybe there are nods, but I'm not a completist. I haven't read a ton of Wolverine stories. So I think it's a great read, whether you're a Wolverine person or not, whether you're a fan of either of these artists or not. It's definitely worth a look, and that's Wolverine Blood Hungry. couple more things about for the OHotMU segment. Mike Zeck. I mentioned that he drew the picture for the Amazo entry in Who's Who, and I couldn't remember anything else that he had drawn, so I went back and I did a little search on Comic Book DB, and he really hasn't done very much work at all for DC Comics. Most of his work, overwhelmingly has been for Marvel. He's also done some work for some independents. I believe some of his first work was for Charlton. He did do some cover work, but he didn't do a lot of interiors for DC over the years. And from what I could find, this page that he did, this drawing of Amazo, was the first work that he did for DC Comics. And he only did work in one other issue of Who's Who, and that's, I think it was issue 18, so I'm not going to be getting to that anytime soon. Now, about Amazo, I mentioned that Amazo showed up in Season 2 of Justice League, that is the Justice League cartoon. He also shows up in Season 3 of Season 1 of JLU. In an episode called The Return, which I just watched recently. I thought was quite good, and I may talk about that on a future episode of Dave Talks Comics. And finally, on an unrelated note, I have started to take pictures of panels from comic books that I'm reading and tweeting them. So if you want to see those pictures, and I will try to collect those and make them available when I eventually talk about these comics, but there's usually a few week lag between the time I read a comic and the time that an episode comes out wherein I'm talking about it. So if you'd like to see the images, check out my Twitter feed. That's at Dave Talks Comics. That's it for episode 35 of Dave Talks Comics. Questions or comments can be posted on the episode page at davetalkscomics.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I'll be talking about some other comics, like maybe Hawkman, and probably some more OHotMU. Yeah, that sounds right. Thank you for listening.